To the Wednesday, February 17, 2021 meeting of the Transportation Advisory Board to the Met Council. And of course, you know, we're meeting virtually due to the governor's peacetime emergency order. And that will continue for some time yet, I think. I don't know. We should have everybody raise their hand that's been vaccinated, but I'm not raising mine. And I remember a few people have had some good success there, so that's nice to see. We can handle, I think, the approval of the agenda and the roll call of folks participating in the meeting today in a single motion. And so, Ms. Ernst, will you call the roll and seek approval of the agenda in that roll call?
Anderson.
Present and aye.
Bailey.
Present and aye.
Barber. Barnes.
Present, aye.
Boyles.
Here and aye.
Crimmins.
Present and aye.
Dugan.
Present, aye.
Foster.
Present, aye.
Fox.
Present and aye.
Geisler.
Present and aye.
Giuliani Stevens.
Present and aye.
Gotell. Hanson.
Present, aye.
Holberg.
Here, yes.
Hollinshead.
Present, aye.
Jepson. Johnson.
Present. Aye.
There's two
Keeley.
Johnsons today.
Aye, present.
Lindeke. Look.
Present and aye.
McDonald. Or Bewan.
Present and aye.
Matas Castillo.
Present and aye.
Narayanan. Petrick.
Present and aye.
Reich.
Present, aye.
Sanger.
Here, yes.
Schember. Stephenson. Tolbert.
Yes and aye.
Williams. Winchell.
Aye and aye.
All right, thank you. I think
I was actually a minute. This is John Ulrich, here and I.
This is Gotell, here and I.
Thank you.
Tom Workman, here and I.
And what about Mayor Stephenson? Is he back yet? He was on the exec committee call. I think if you keep your eyes open, Ms. Ernst, I think you'll see him showing up here momentarily. Well, thank you, everybody. The agenda is approved. I'll do my report first. First of all, a couple of welcoming comments for Q Vang, who is the District G alternate for Chris Geisler. I don't know if Q Vang is on the call today. I could not hear that. Q Vang on the call. There. Would you welcome? And do you have any comment you'd like to make quickly?
No, I am extremely excited to be here. Currently, I manage state appropriations for Minnesota housing, so I'm hoping that I will be able to use some of my expertise to the team. Thank you.
It's nice to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Then Amanda Hemmingson-Jager is the District F alternate for Mary Giuliani Stevens. Is Ms. Hemmingson-Jager here? Yes. All right.
I am here. Thank you. Nice to meet everybody.
Yeah, thank you for being here, Amanda. Thanks. And you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a legislative analyst for the state of Minnesota Driver Vehicle Services, so a little interested in transportation there. My background is in lab genetics, but I also have a degree from the Humphreys, so kind of bridging that gap between science and policy.
Thanks for being interested in serving. We're pleased to have you with us. Thank you. And then Shannon Watson is the District G alternate for William Lindeke. Is Ms. Watson with us?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Glad to be here.
All right, folks, if you're not speaking, would you put yourselves on mute? We're getting a little feedback from somebody. There, that helped. Well, I can hear it again. Maybe it's the waves lapping down at Matt's place. So a couple other things I want to cover quickly as part of the chair report. Commissioner Karwoski was on briefly on the exec committee call and then had to jump off to go to a meeting with Charlie Zelli. There's a bill that's come up, House Bill 1027, that I think essentially provides that cities and counties would be fully responsible for funding all transit operations and capital maintenance costs. So there's a lot of interest in that, of course, and Commissioner Gattel was going to try to get a little bit more detail around the bill. I don't know if she's gotten that yet, but she'll report back to us if she doesn't have it right now. Commissioner Gattel, anything to add at this point in time?
I don't have it yet. I'll have a summary before the end of the meeting, and I'd be happy to enlighten everybody. I think there's concern on everybody, but also just to get the facts for everybody. I'll have that soon, before the end of the meeting.
Thanks, Commissioner. And then the other thing that we needed to have folks think about was, Ms. Foster, it was House Bill 1027. And then Ms. Ernst, I think Member Tolbert has arrived as well. Just came up in the chat. The other thing I wanted to cover quickly with folks was the opportunity to volunteer for a work group. We discussed in the past solicitation this unique projects category, which represents about 4.5% of the traditional funds available through the regional solicitation. Deb Barber here as well, Ms. Ernst. And that's roughly about $4.5 million. We had never been able to really define how to use that money, or if we figured out how to use it or decided there wasn't a project that was worthy of that use once the sort of guidelines were established, what would happen with that $4.5 million or 4.5% of the funding that we'd allocated to that category. And I think, Amy, if you're on and you want to supplement those comments, we certainly would welcome your little backgrounding for folks. But what it's going to require, and Cole Henniker from staff is going to lead this group, we need to put a unique projects work group together. And we want to get multiple perspectives on this work group that will try to find some common language or some principles or guidelines that we can follow with respect to unique projects. So I want to try to get those multiple perspectives, as I mentioned, city, county, modal folks. We'd like to have folks that are interested in serving on this unique projects work group get a hold of Elaine within the next couple of weeks. They'd like to kick off the work in March, and there'll be 3 to 4 meetings involved, and then that work group would come back to the tab with some recommendations on around the unique projects category. So to the extent you don't have to indicate interest in serving now, but if you could let Elaine know the next couple of weeks, we'd appreciate it. And to the extent that Cole or Amy have any supplemental comments to those comments regarding the unique projects work group, please feel free to comment.
No, just a little context. This is Amy Benowitz with MTS staff. So before every regional solicitation, we go through an evaluation process and update the solicitation, ask ourselves questions about how the last one went and what we might want to change going into the next solicitation. So we are just going to be kicking off that process this spring, summer, and we'll be coming to tab with other questions related to the solicitation. But when we did this evaluation 2 years ago, one of the decisions that was made is that we should have a new category for what we called unique projects. And at the time, the other decision we made was that the funding for that category, rather than being 4 years in advance, would be 2 years in advance of the allocation. So at the time, we didn't have to put any definition onto the unique project category. We just decided it would exist. And then we kind of pushed it down the road to putting the definition on what that would entail for the category. So that's essentially what this work group is going to be doing. They will be defining what constitutes a unique project, how we will compare and score those projects against one another, and then bring any recommendations they have that the work group has as to how that category will be included in the solicitation to the full tab for approval, along with approving the rest of the regional solicitation. So that's kind of the context for this work.
Thank you, Amy, for that backgrounding and context. So, folks, if you're interested, just get a hold of Elaine. I'd like to get somewhere between 7 and 9 people involved in this process, if possible, and then we'll get you folks to work sometime in March. That's it for me. We basically covered everything that's going to be on our agenda today, and there's some interesting issues to discuss coming up in addition to our conversation on equity at the towards the end of the meeting. And you're going to have the pleasure of meeting Roderick Saltall from the Met Council staff, who's going to do a wonderful job in leading that portion of our work. Now we'll go on to agency reports, and Member Barnes, anything for MnDOT?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just one item. I know you brought it up last month about the federal COVID funding coming in the state, and just so the group knows that there's still options being looked at how the distribution. There's a number of different ways to kind of break out the funding. So that's one piece, but right now it's also, there's a lot of questions, or not a lot, some questions around what their reporting requirements will be, since it is eligible for operating funds, not just for what would look or feel like projects. So once we have some more information on that and kind of the distribution, then we'll be letting the staff know, and then from there what that process will be and how TAB will be involved will come out. So just a quick update on that. I know folks have had some questions, but we just don't have that distribution resolved yet. So that's all I had.
That's helpful. Thank you. Did that cause any members to want to inquire further of Member Barnes in that category? I can also tell you, Member Barnes just caused me to think about it. 2 of the past 3 weeks, I've been on calls with Secretary Buttigieg, one before he was confirmed and one after. I think we're going to see some transportation innovation occurring here. That I think the president is really keen on a transportation bill, either on a standalone basis or a more significant reauthorization bill, viewing transportation infrastructure projects as a keen way of providing some economic development to the country, as well as coming up with transportation infrastructure improvements. So this unique projects work that we're going to be doing, I think, looms pretty large in the scheme of things, plus the equity work, which is another key component of what Secretary Buttigieg is concerned about here. And I'll talk more about that later when we get to Roderick. All right. Did that prompt any further inquiry from members? Otherwise, we'll move on to Member Bewan, who can give us an update from the MPCA perspective. Member Bewan, anything to report?
Mr. Chair, members, thank you. Good afternoon. A couple things on behalf of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Just a reminder that we're in the middle of a Clean Cars Minnesota rulemaking. On December 21st, MPCA published our notice of intent to adopt a rule for clean cars. The next steps in the process are coming up. Next week, we have public hearings are scheduled in front of an administrative law judge to hear commentary on the rules from the public. There's no need to register in advance for that. Those hearings are from 3 to 6, both on the 22nd and the 23rd. The comment period for the rulemaking will close on March 15th. So after the hearings, there will be an opportunity for open comment up through March 15th. And then ultimately the administrative law judge will make his ruling on whether the MPC. That was one item. The second item is just a more informational item that the governor's climate change subcabinet is hosting a series of monthly climate forum events. And we have one coming up in March, which actually will be hosted by MnDOT and will be related to clean fuels. So that's of interest, I think, to the group. But the governor's climate subcabinet continues to meet and discuss issues around climate. Information on those forums can be found at min.gov/climate if anyone is interested in learning more about that. So that's all I had for today.
Questions for Member Bewin? Comments? All right, I think for elected officials, I know our City Council passed a resolution supporting the clean car rulemaking endeavor of the MPCA, and by the end of the comment period, I suppose, Member Bewin, you would accept support in any form or fashion, whether it's an elected body, an elected official, or even a citizen member of the tab. They should be mindful of that March 15th deadline for comments.
That's correct. Any individual in Minnesota can comment. You know, if the city of Edina took that measure, is the city of Edina making some effort to provide that information into the record?
I believe so.
Mr. Chair.
I don't know where the resolution that was passed was forwarded to, but I'll check on that. Should it go a certain place so I can verify that?
Yeah, the information, all of that information is provided on our website under the Clean Cars rulemaking information as to how those comments should be made.
All right, very good. I'll check on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, the MAC, Airports Commission, Member Crimmins?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First thing I want to talk about is the CDC has decided not to require COVID testing for domestic flights at this time. If they stress the fact that it's at this time. But international flights are still being required. International arrivals are still being required to be tested before they depart their countries. And Delta has opened a COVID testing facility at the end of Concourse G. They're starting up daily flights to Amsterdam. I want to say daily, but weekly flights to Amsterdam. But before you can fly, you have to be tested at the Delta, at the end of Delta's terminal, G terminal. And if you test negative, then you proceed to gate G6. If you test positive, you have to go to another secure facility and be tested a second time. If you test negative the second time, you're allowed to fly. If you test positive the second time, you have to go into quarantine. So the MAC has decided that we're going to open up a testing facility for international flights for all the other airlines. And that's going to be open sometime next month. They're not 100% sure of the timeline, but it's going to be in the parking ramp over by the COVID testing site, I think the floor above. So they're working on building that out now. So that I just want to let everybody be aware, if you're going to fly international, you better allow some extra time for these testing procedures in order to board your flight. And then Sun Country and Allegiant Airlines are expanding their routes and their aircraft. Sun Country wants to expand from 33 aircraft to 50 in the next year or two. And Allegiant Airlines is looking to be aggressive in expanding. So some of the low-cost carriers see this as an opportunity to build flights. And again, if we open up our testing site for all other airlines, they'll be able to use that testing facility for their benefit. And that's about all we have at this time. I just say TSA said over the weekend for President's Day, 4 million people flew. 4.03 million people flew. and they're just a little concerned that if more people start flying, they could be requiring domestic testing. So they're going to watch that real closely between the TSA and the CDC to see how these numbers keep improving. And that's all I have at this time, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, very interesting. Did that prompt any inquiries for members? Mayor Winchell?
Yeah, Carl, so what happens if you've had the vaccine, both shots? Do you just bring your card with that says you've been tested? Because you test, you're going to test positive.
You'd have to bring your card, I'm sure. I don't know if you're going to test negative or positive.
Well, I was told that you would test positive for a while because they put that virus in you. So I was just curious if that was discussed.
I haven't. No, that wasn't discussed at all, Mayor.
I think it might be something worth it as more and more people are getting vaccinated to find out what how that's handled for people.
I'll contact Delta, see if I can get something and get back to everybody. I'll send it to Elaine.
Yeah, good question. Good inquiry. Anything further for Member Crimmins?
This is Commissioner Johnson, Washington County.
Yes, Commissioner.
I would just say I was one of those that was flying over the weekend, flew into Austin, and thankfully got out again before things really got bad. But I just wanted to say I can confirm that when I was mentioning at the time, the airport this last weekend, it was like flying normally, it seemed like, as far as the crowds coming back. So I wasn't surprised to see that kind of results. So they are definitely coming back to the airports to fly, and the flights were full that we were on. So it is starting to get more comfortable with flying. So I won't be surprised if they start wanting to make sure everybody flying is COVID-free. So,
yeah, thanks, Commissioner Johnson, for those observations. Interesting. All right, and then on to Deb Barber, our Metropolitan Council member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. Just a couple of things to report on today. One is we did award through council the construction contract for the D line. As you may recall, the D line had some regional solicitation funding in it. It's the route that goes from Mall of America to Brooklyn Center Transit Station, basically replacing what is currently our Route 5, or by and large. And then right now, with this having this contract in place, we're looking at going into service probably December of 2022. So we have some exciting news. We like to see forward progress on these things. The other thing is we do have a survey out there. We're trying to get public comment on the Orange Line connecting service. The public comment period is open until February 22nd. So this is for transit lines that connect up to the Orange Line. So it's sort of how you could move throughout the transit network and take advantage of infrastructure that's being built with the Orange Line coming online, which is looking at either late 2021 or early 2022. So if you want to go to the Met Council webpage, you can get a link through there to that survey. For a lot of these communities are represented by people on the screen here, so we want as much comment as possible. So hopefully we hear from all of you, and that's all I have.
Thank you. Yes, Member Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Member Barber, has there been any conversation around both the D line and the 5 and rerouting it in light of George Floyd Square?
We have been talking with the city because one of the stations was initially intended on it right in that area. So so we have had conversations. I don't know that we've made a final determination yet what the plan is, but we have been actively talking with the city council member from that area to make sure that, yes, that we factor in what the community needs there as well. Yeah, good question. Yeah, go ahead.
Member Foster, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Member Barber. It's good that you're talking to the city council member who reps the district. Have there also been direct conversations with the community members along that line, especially like within those 3 or 4 blocks?
I think we've done some. I'm looking to see. I don't know if Katie is on today. I can, how about if I reach out to Katie Roth, and we'll circle back with you kind of with what we've been, how we want to work with that and making sure that we do get the voices from the community. So yeah, I'll circle back with you with some more information.
Thank you.
Thank you. Member Reich?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would add the public works staff, who of course directly interface with the Met Council staff, have been doing several different ways to approach stakeholders and residents in that area. There's multiple sort of touch points. There's organized groups that are in the George Floyd Square per se that are very active in that area as a group. And then there's sort of the more general surveying of residents and commercial property owners. But 2 input points, and there's an effort to coordinate all these input points, rallying around. We put some substantial funding around bringing in people from the community who have sort of an artistic background to really open up dialogue in a meaningful way versus the more traditional sort of logic model decision making that happens in these meetings. And so I know Council Vice President Jenkins was a big proponent of taking different approaches for input, given that this is a different situation. And I know the technical staff are right there, but they're not trying to be prescriptive on a technical perspective ahead of the community conversation.
And I think we do have time to have a thorough discussions about what we do in through that area, which is helpful. And I think that I'll try and get some more information and circle back for next tab meeting so I can talk a little bit more about what the plan is, both for our engagement and like I said, I don't believe a final decision has been made as to what we're doing there yet.
Other questions for Member Barber? All right, thanks for those comments too, Member Reich. All right, we'll move on to our TAC report. Our TAC chair, John Solberg from MnDOT. I don't know if you have anything you want to report out on or you want to move just into business items, but I'll give you that opportunity.
Just one comment, Mr. Chair, and that is that the TAC Executive Committee finalized the membership for funding and programming and the planning committees at our meeting last month. That's the only comment I have other than business items.
Good. That comment provide any motivation for members to inquire further of Member Solberg for work at the TAC? All right. We'll move on to the business items now, and we've got some that fall into the consent category and some that fall into the action category, the non-consent items. There's 3 items on the consent agenda, the minutes, and then there's 2 streamlined matters that deal with a lighting project improvement that is out on Highway 212 that MnDOT wants to do, and then there's a railroad gate install in Richfield. Does any member of the tab wish to remove any of these items from the consent agenda? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as shown.
So moved, Anderson.
Second, Gotell.
Very good. Moved Anderson, second Gotell. Any further discussion with respect to approval of the consent agenda? Jenna Ernst, please call the roll on approving the consent agenda.
Anderson.
Aye.
Bailey.
Aye.
Barber.
Aye.
Barnes.
Aye.
Boyles.
Aye.
Crimmins.
Aye.
Dugan.
Aye.
Foster.
Aye.
Fox.
Aye.
Geisler.
Aye.
Giuliani Stevens.
Aye.
Gotell.
Aye.
Hanson.
Aye.
Holberg.
Yes.
Hollinshead.
Aye.
Jepson.
Aye.
Johnston.
Aye.
Wayne, thank you. Keeley.
Aye.
Lindeke.
Aye.
Look.
Aye.
Bewan.
Aye.
Matas Castillo.
Aye.
Johnson Glenn.
Aye.
Petrick.
Aye.
Reich.
Aye.
Sanger. Sanger.
Aye.
Thank you. Schember. Stephenson.
Aye.
Tolbert. Tolbert, Ulrich,
Aye.
Williams,
Aye.
Windschuttle,
Aye.
Workman.
Aye.
All right, the motion is approved. The consent agenda items are all adopted. I just, as they called out Commissioner Gattell, it reminded me that I forgot to report out on one thing in my chair's report, and that is that Commissioner Gattell has agreed to serve as the first vice chair, and Mayor Windschuttle has agreed to serve as the second vice chair of the TAB Exec Committee. So we thank them for stepping up and volunteering to serve in those capacities, and for the rest of the Exec Committee and supporting that. Now we'll move on to the non-consent agenda items. The first matter there, TAC Chair Solberg will take is 2021-04, which is the proposed 2021 safety targets, and the goal here is to have the adoption of the 2021 safety targets by the Transportation Advisory Board, and recommend to the Met Council that they be adopted as well. I'll turn it over now to Chair Solberg, and we have Heidi Schulberg with us, who can make a PowerPoint presentation if necessary, but we're going to start with Chair Solberg with respect to this matter, and he can background us well on this issue.
All right, thank you, Chair Hovland, and members. Today I will review the action item in front of you, which is again to recommend council adoption of the 2021 safety performance targets. So some of you may be aware of this and others not, but the Department of Transportation and NPOs are both responsible for setting.
Long dark winter. We've asked much of you at times. We've asked.
Member Johnson.
Also know it was a
Member
bad.
Johnson, go on mute, would you please, Commissioner Johnson?
I did. Sorry.
Thank you.
All right. Threw me off there for a minute. I thought I was giving a speech and it was doing something else. So,
sorry, I thought I did.
DOTs and MPOs are responsible for setting safety targets. And in the past, the Met Council has followed MnDOT's lead in setting those performance measures and those targets. And so this presentation in front of you starts in a little bit different fashion, in that about a year and a half ago, MnDOT's performance targets are based on the 5 years previous. And back in 2016, MnDOT changed the way that accidents, crashes were reported and serious injuries. So that was swaying the numbers that the state reported, and it looked like numbers were actually going up. So this came to the Technical Advisory Committee, like I said, about 14 months ago, because they're required, the MPO is required to set safety targets within 180 days of the state. At that time, the committee pushed forward the idea that we didn't want to have a metropolitan safety target that could potentially rise from over the previous year. And so with the pandemic, that discussion was kind of pushed back until approximately December of this year, when a committee of transportation official technicians from Department of Transportation, City of Minneapolis, St. Paul counties, and Met Council met to look at different methods for setting these safety targets. In that time frame, the state of Minnesota went back and looked at the way they set their performance targets. And this is important because, as I indicated, that was previously set on the 5 years of performance prior to is how they set the targets. And the reason is from FHWA standpoint, if the state doesn't meet its safety targets, there was a penalty to the Department of Transportation, which the MPOs do not have. That penalty comes in the fact of the way they allocate money and how the department spends it. Well, in this last year, the Department of Transportation realized they were already utilizing the money in the way FHWA's penalties would make them do so. So they went after more aspirational goals towards zero death and setting the statewide numbers. Met Council looked at that, our team looked at that and looked at the overall goal that the state had for goals in 2025 and decided to use that as the basis for the MPO's safety targets. That being said, what happens is the state targets, because they're still based in part on performance. I don't know, did I lose everybody or am I still on? Still on?
Yes.
Still there.
Okay, I see several people dropping off right now. So let me get back. So the state's looking at those safety targets and decided to go after the more aspirational goals because we were already effectively spending the money in the way FHWA's penalty would make them do that. The Met Council numbers are based on that, our respective share of those, but it is a straight line percentage from the 2021 number or the 2020 numbers through 2025. And that's the targets you see in front of us. Important thing to remember in that is that that was specifically set by this committee as a goal to look at where our performance was in any given year compared to that 5-year goal. And in this case, what that would mean for Met Council for the Metropolitan region is 74 fatalities from 106. So that starts to drive significantly lower. 464 serious injuries from 738, and then 115 pedestrian and bicycle fatal and serious injuries out of 181, which is the initial target. But it's a straight line target down towards that zero in alignment with the state's 2025 goals. The TAC committee did review the goals and supported them, the technical committee, and supported recommending their approval to TAB. Are there any questions?
Questions for Chair Solberg on this issue? All right. Thank you, Chair Solberg. Is there a motion to adopt 2021-04?
Motion by Windshuttle.
There a second?
Second, Gotel.
We got a motion and a second to adopt Resolution 2021-04, which is the proposed adoption of the 2021 safety performance targets that Chair Solberg just described. All right, any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Anderson.
Aye.
Bailey.
Aye.
Barber.
Aye.
Barnes.
Aye.
Boyles.
Aye.
Crimmins. Crimmins. Dugan.
Aye.
Foster.
Aye.
Fox.
Aye.
Geisler.
Aye.
Giuliani Stevens.
Aye.
Gotel.
Aye.
Hanson.
Aye.
Holberg.
Yes.
Hollinshead.
Aye.
Jepson.
Aye.
Johnson Wayne.
Aye.
Keeley.
Aye.
Lindeke.
Aye.
Look.
Aye.
Bewan.
Aye.
Metis Castillo.
Aye.
Johnson Glenn.
Aye.
Petrick.
Aye.
Reich.
Aye.
Reich.
Aye.
Sanger.
Aye.
Schember. Stephenson.
Aye.
Tolbert. Ulrich. Williams.
Aye.
Windshuttle.
Aye.
Workman.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. The motion carries. The 2021-04 is approved with the adoption by the Met Council of the 2021 safety performance targets being recommended by the TAB. Thank you for your work on that. And then back to Chair Solberg from the TAC with regard to the scope change request on the Beltline Boulevard project, the pedestrian improvement project in conjunction with Southwest LRT in St. Louis Park. Chair Solberg.
Thank you, Chair Hovland. So the next action item in front of you is the scope change to eliminate 2 segments from the CSA 25 Beltline Boulevard pedestrian improvements with no reduction in federal funds. So the background on this project is that St. Louis Park was originally granted approximately $560,000 to construct sidewalks and streetscaping that were really in association with the Southwest LRT project. What happened over time was that Southwest LRT constructed one of the segments of sidewalk, and St. Louis Park entered into an agreement with a developer to construct a second segment of the sidewalk. However, during that same time period, of the 4 sidewalk segments, the price went up overall, and the 2 remaining are still more money, essentially, than the project was granted. So the city has now requested that the scope be revised to only include those 2 segments that were not covered by the developers agreement or by Southwest LRT. TAC funding and programming and the TAC committee itself looked at the application and noted that while there's only approximately $50,000 remaining, that we would recommend that TAB allow that project to move forward with no reduction in those federal funds, because the $50,000 to take and move back would be almost more difficult to manage than to just allow the project to keep. That concludes my comments.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Chair Solberg on this particular matter involving Southwest LRT and some of the pedestrian movements involved? There's going to be refinements as we move along here. Member Sanger, do you have any comment?
First of all, I am going to make a motion to revise the scope with no reduction of the funding for St. Louis Park. But second of all, in addition to the good explanation we just got, there's a couple of other factors that have played into this. It's not a very straightforward situation, because part of what happened here was with the various delays in the planning and timing and construction for the Southwest Light Rail, it has further delayed the city's ability in coordinating and planning with the Southwest staff in order to be able to construct the sidewalk segments in the most efficient, coordinated manner possible. And the same timing delays have also at least contributed, or been part of the contribution to why the costs overall have escalated for this project. But the important thing here is that even though the scope will change, these 2 segments will still be constructed. They'll just be under the auspices of different entities.
All right, Member Sanger, with respect to action transmittal 2021-05, the recommended action does include no reduction in federal funds, and I think that was one of the things that you were concerned about. So that is embedded in that particular recommended action.
I would move approval of this with no reduction.
All right, you're moving 2021-05 as shown in the recommended action. Is there a second?
Dugan will second.
Say that again, please.
Dugan will second.
Thank you, Mr. Dugan. Member Dugan. Any further discussion from TAB members? Roll call, please, with respect to recommended action 2021-05, Ms. Ernst.
Anderson.
Aye.
Bailey.
Aye.
Barber.
Aye.
Barnes.
Aye.
Boyles,
Aye.
Crimmins,
Aye.
Dugan,
Aye.
Foster,
Aye.
Fox,
Aye.
Geisler,
Aye.
Giuliani Stevens,
Aye.
Gotell,
Aye.
Hanson,
Aye.
Holberg,
Yes.
Hollinshead,
Aye.
Jepson,
Aye.
Johnson Wayne,
Aye.
Keeley,
Aye.
Lindicky,
Aye.
Look,
Aye.
Buin,
Aye.
Metis Castillo,
Aye.
Johnson Glenn,
Aye.
Petrick,
Aye.
Reich,
Aye.
Sanger,
Aye.
Schember, Stephenson,
Aye.
Tolbert,
Yes.
Ulrich,
Aye.
Williams,
Aye.
Windshuttle,
Yes.
Workman.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. Action transmittal 2021-05 is approved as recommended. Thank you, Member Sanger, for making the motion. And then, of course, when we have these scope changes that we approve, there's a traveling companion, which is the amendment of that project into the TIP. And so 2021-06 is the TIP amendment for St. Louis Park that we need to also move it in there. So is there, and incidentally, I've tried to get these two coupled together that we could do them in a single motion, but Lane's going to work on this with the legal folks, but at least for now, they're telling us that we need to do these in two separate motions. So is there a motion to approve 2021-06?
So moved, Windshuttle.
Windshuttle moves. Second,
Second.
is that Member Sanger?
Yes, it is.
All right, thank you. All right, we got a motion second on 2021-06, which would move this particular project into the TIP. Any further conversation, discussion? Roll call, please, Ms. Ernst.
Anderson,
Aye.
Bailey,
Aye.
Barber,
Aye.
Barnes,
Aye.
Boyles,
Aye.
Crimmins,
Aye.
Dugan,
Aye.
Foster,
Aye.
Fox,
Aye.
Geisler,
Aye.
Giuliani Stevens,
Aye.
Gotell. Gotell?
Aye.
Thank
Aye.
you. Hanson,
Aye.
Holberg,
Yes.
Hollinshead,
Aye.
Jepson,
Aye.
Johnson Wayne,
Aye.
Keeley,
Aye.
Lindicky,
Aye.
Look,
Aye.
Buin,
Aye.
Metis Castillo,
Aye.
Johnson Glenn,
Aye.
Petrick,
Aye.
Reich,
Aye.
Sanger,
Aye.
Schember, Stephenson,
Aye.
Tolbert,
Yes.
Ulrich,
Aye.
Williams, Windshuttle,
Yes.
Workman.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. 2021-06 is approved. And now we're going to move on to one of the more significant issues that we have to deal with. And this is the Highway 252 program year change request. And Chair Solberg is going to take us through this. As you know from your reading, this is a corridor of commerce project. There's about $119 million involved there. It's got 4 sub-elements. It's got some significant components to it from an environmental standpoint. The TAC supported moving the program year, and we're going to hear more about that now from Chair Solberg, and we've got other folks with us as well to help guide us through this conversation. So, Chair Solberg, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Hovland. So before you today is a consideration of moving the program year for 4 projects that were approved through the regional solicitation. And normally that would be something that probably moves pretty quick, but as Chair Hovland indicated, this has some more legs to it. So there were 4 projects that were approved through the regional solicitation in program years 23 and 25. It's important to know that that they were selected in years 2016, 2018, and 2020. Now, timeline is important in this as far as the tab to consider. These 4 projects were applied for by local entities, the cities of Brooklyn Center and Hennepin County and Brooklyn Park. They were all improvements on the 252 corridor. And in 2018, the state awarded MnDOT money, $119 million, to develop the 252 corridor as a MnPass corridor through the Corridors of Commerce program. And so that money moved forward, and the department started developing a new large project in that corridor. In late 2019, the state and its partners, looking at the environmental considerations of the project, decided that this needed to move to a larger environmental process. And I'll explain a little bit of the environmental process very quickly. The project started out as an environmental assessment. There are 2 other essential categories for environmental process: a categorical exclusion and an EIS. And really what that means is, one, in a categorical exclusion, there's really no extenuating circumstances and really quite clear that there would not be any significant effects. An EA really comes in at the level of there are no significant effects, or it's unknown if they're significant. And so that's where this project started. In 2019, the department, along with its partners in the project, were coming across more information in the discovery and development of the project to realize that there very well could be significant effects. And so they needed to move to an EIS to facilitate a very well-defined process that looks much deeper at the impacts and the cumulative impacts. And that's another distinguishing difference between the EA and the EIS. They look at larger and longer impacts, and they look deeper into the subject matter that's proposed. So when you go from an EA to an EIS, the EIS, being much more in depth, takes longer time to move forward and go through that discovery period. So what happened during that is that lengthened the time for project development, which was projected to be earlier than, well, it was projected to be 23. Now it's moved into that calendar 25 timeframe. The other part that's important to know about this is that even though the cities of Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park, and Hennepin County applied for money for these 4 particular projects, that because they are now in an EIS, they are looked at as one project by the federal government and by the federal environmental process. Considered connected actions, meaning the MnPass corridor could not move forward if it were not for intersection improvements or interchange improvements. So one cannot be done without the other. So that's another extenuating circumstance in this project that TAC was looking at in their recommendations to this. So a couple additional things to think about here is that those 4 projects total about $25 million, which if granted a program year would be moved into the 2026 program year. And the projects being in currently in years 23 through 25 would vacate those dollars in 23 and 25. Council staff has looked at and asked applicants if they are able to move into those timeframes, and they have indicated that they have found projects that could use that $25 million in those program years. That was an important aspect to TAC to understand if there was any loss in funding, and there would not be. And then finally, we kind of roll down into the pros and cons. TAC recommended the list that you saw before you with just really the context of it was not a policy decision that TAC could make, but we wanted the tab to understand that, right, it's not consistent with the current policy. It does potentially create a gap in some of these large regional projects where they've solicited money, and between the time they solicit and the time they build would be up to 9 years. So something for TAB to consider. Also that the corridors of commerce money was directed by the legislature and not by any one of the entities specifically in this project. There is limited financial impact overall, as I indicated, because other projects can move into the program years. And combining projects is better than for the traveling public than trying to separate out all the projects and do them separately. And then the final point I'll leave with that was discussion is if the project were not to receive the program year extension, those funds could be lost, which we understand to mean in this program that corridors of commerce could not cover specifically the 2 projects in Brooklyn Center that were solicited in 2016 prior to corridors of commerce, because the corridors of commerce took that to mean that those dollars were programmed for the project already, and corridors of commerce was not allocated for those 2. That would mean that that not allowing the program year change could result in additional impact to the cities and overall in the case cities and counties if the program year changes were not provided. It does potentially put the risk of that corridors of commerce. It raises the risk that it may not be completed. However, that should not be the only consideration to be examined in your discussion today. There are program partners that are available to speak to the project if TAB so wishes, Chair. That concludes my comments.
Thank you, Chair Solberg. Well done. This is a big, complicated project. It has unique circumstances that have caused these delays. Nevertheless, as Chair Solberg points out, it has run against a policy that the TAB has had of not granting more than 1 program year extension in the past. But there are unique circumstances that can unfold, as Member Geisler pointed out in our executive committee meeting, that will cause us to want to have a conversation and use our judgment. And so to the issue of might there be a reason in the near future to think about policies that we may want to adopt in terms of additional extensions beyond what we presently provide for in our policy, that could be a conversation for another day, or as Member Geisler points out, it might be something that we just want to take on a one-off basis because factual circumstances may be different in every situation. And you're going to see that very circumstance today as between this Highway 252 project and CASA 103 project, which is going to immediately follow this one. So we did have a conversation at the exec committee about the consequences of denial of the extension. Mayor Winchell raised that question. I don't know, Mayor, you want to comment on that? And then Steve Peterson also answered the question about, well, couldn't they reapply in another year? And I think we should have that information as well, too. So Mayor Winchell, I don't know if you want to comment on the answer you received to your question and how that impacted you, but please go ahead.
Well, I guess a lot of the question was more, are we opening up some door that we don't know what we're opening? So I think it helped to explain the process, and John did a great job explaining it to the big group here, and I think he picked up off of questions that we had regarding what would basically happen if you didn't do it? And you know, obviously there's a lot of money lost, and that just doesn't make sense in this day and age to lose anything that we could put forward to transportation. I mean, that's what we're here to do. So I think just having the ability to talk about it really helped to get answers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And member Geisler, this is up in your neck of the woods, and you had some, I think, important comments that you made at the exec committee meeting, and maybe would you care to restate those now, please?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, the first thing I want to highlight is that this series of projects plus the Quarter of Commerce project together is regionally significant for a lot of reasons. I mean, the north half of Hennepin County uses this thoroughfare. A good chunk of Anoka County uses this thoroughfare. You know, while we only see 2 city names up here, I can tell you right now that the city of Blaine, Coon Rapids, and over Anoka are also going to benefit from this type of project on the north side of the river. So it really does fall into the regionally significant value. And as Chair Solberg mentioned, you know, minimizing impact here, this is heavily used and heavily traveled. And if we were to allow these to piecemeal out, you know, we're talking a decade of disruption on a heavily used thoroughfare to connect to 94 and 100, as well as 694. And so by planning these things together, it's lowering citizen impact, it's using the funds appropriately. And I honestly look at this and go, moving into an environmental impact statement makes a lot of sense when we're doing 4 miles of construction, half a mile from the river. And really just taking our time and doing that well, at no fault of any of these applicants, at no fault of the projects themselves. We're doing better due diligence. We're making a lot more sense with this. You know, this to me falls so much in the bucket of this is such an exception. This is kind of what we're here for. We're kind of here to really say, use our management discretion, use our governance ability to say, yeah, we could make rules around this, but then we're going to be making a whole bunch of, well, maybe this, maybe that, maybe this, if then else. And really that's what we're here for, is to look at this and say, this is super extenuating. And it starts to make a lot of sense for the region, for the citizens of the area and north and south of it, and just frankly, for improving our infrastructure.
All right. Thank you, Member Geisler. And Steve Peterson, would you address that reapplication issue that folks raised at the exec, and that'll take care of that, and answering that question, I think, in advance at the tab here. Steve on? All right, I'm going to give him a chance to get on here, but I think, Elaine, if you're on, I think to the point that Chair Solberg raised about being able to fill the gap and making sure we don't lose any money by potentially approving this program year extension. Would you address that issue, please, and what staff has already done to look to see how we can infill if we approve this project being pushed back?
Yes. Thanks, Chair. For the regional solicitation projects.
Your audio isn't very good, Elaine.
How's that?
That's much better.
Thanks, Chair. For the tab, last December approved the regional solicitation projects for the 2020 solicitation. And we were at the point right now where we were programming those projects. And part of the application, we asked the applicants to indicate whether they want 2024 or 2025. And we also asked them a question whether they can go earlier if there's additional earlier funds available. So what I did is I contacted all the applicants that were selected that indicated they could go earlier. And we have enough projects, actually we received more than enough volunteers that could go earlier. And we do have them programmed for 2022, because that also is in the next item you'll be considering, and 2023. So whether these projects are approved for a program shift, that would move the funding to later years. Or if it's not approved, these projects will probably be withdrawn. We still would have to have those earlier projects moved forward, which we are able to do.
All right. So the long and short of it is that we can fill the gap. Is that correct? I see you nodding your head affirmatively.
Correct. The amount of funding is the same wherever the projects are. And so we just shift them around We did have a project that was selected for the 2018 solicitation that was programmed for 2024 that is moving, or 23 that's moving up to 2022 also. So we're able to shift previously selected project, at least one of them, forward besides the new ones selected.
All right. Are there questions for Chair Solberg? Yes, Member Anderson.
I just want to maybe comment briefly and just echo Member Geisler's comments and also add that, you know, I think the regional benefit to this project goes beyond just that area. It reaches out and affects traffic on 169 and even the 35 corridor as you open this up and clean that up a little bit. So I would strongly urge us to pass this today, and I'd like to go ahead and make a motion to approve.
All right, thank you, Member Anderson. I will note that the truncated version, somebody not on mute. The truncated version of this is characterized as Highway 252 program year change, but the recommended action is that the tab consider technical committee comments and determine whether to and approve moving the following 4 Trunk Highway 252 related regional solicitation grants to 2026. And then those are identified in the recommended action. And that is, Member Anderson, what you are proposing or moving. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right, thank you. Is there a second?
Geisler, second.
Okay.
Say, who was the seconder?
Geisler.
Geisler, thank you, Member Geisler. All right, further discussion?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Steve Peterson here. Sorry, I was having some audio issues. You had asked a question previously and the answer about would there be the opportunity for the applicants to reapply for the money in a future solicitation? And the short answer on that is there would be time to apply for some, but not all of the money, because this is 3 separate interchange projects and 1 pedestrian overpass. And given the time frame of the project and the rules of the solicitation, they would not be able to reapply for all of the money. So just to close the loop on that one, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Peterson. That is helpful. I think it's reinforcing of the general notion of the tab members here. All right, any further discussion or comments? Roll call, please, Ms. Ernst, with respect to the motion.
Anderson.
Aye.
Bailey.
Aye.
Barber.
Aye.
Barnes.
Aye.
Boyles.
Aye.
Crimmins.
Aye.
Dugan.
Aye.
Foster.
Aye.
Fox.
Aye.
Geisler.
Aye.
Giuliani Stevens.
Aye.
Hanson.
Aye.
Holberg. Head.
Aye.
Jepson.
Aye.
Johnson Wayne.
Aye.
Keeley.
Aye.
Lindeke.
Aye.
Bewan.
Aye.
Metis Castillo.
Aye.
Johnson Glenn.
Aye.
Petrick.
Aye.
Sanger.
Aye.
Stephenson.
Aye.
Ulrich.
Aye.
Williams. Windshuttle.
Yes.
Workman.
Commissioner Workman.
Go tell aye.
Workman, yes.
Thank you.
Over, yes, too.
All right, thank you, Mr. Tolbert. All right, the motion is approved. Recommended action is adopted for 2021-08. And then I want to take on 2021-09, which also is a program year change request, and then just have a brief conversation with the tab membership before we go into the information items. Talk about this this unique circumstance situation here.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Mr. Chair Boyles, could I just ask a point of information with respect to the last item?
Yes, Member Boyle.
Will the minutes reflect the almost half a dozen reasons that were mentioned by various people for us to meander around the policy this one time on the last item?
Should have a complete record. Miss Elaine or Miss Ernst, we're recording this, I take it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right. All right, on to 2021-09, Chair Silver.
Thank you, Chair Hovland. The request before you is for the Transportation Advisory Board to consider program year changes for two projects that were solicited through the regional solicitation by the City of Brooklyn Park that were in program years 22 and 23. These two particular projects, reconstructing a 2 to 4 lane and streetscaping and transit improvements, are tied to the Blue Line extension, which I think everybody understands that the Blue Line extension was originally scheduled to be under construction in 2019. However, negotiations with BNSF Railroad have delayed the project because of their refusal to allow the LRT on their tracks. So what we have again before us is a couple of local projects that are associated with a large regional project, that being the LRT, that are requesting a program year change through no fault of their own. Total of the two projects is $8 million, $7 million in one and $1 million in the other. The funding and programming and TAC both voted and were in support of the program year changes, while forwarding the comments that it essentially replicate what you just heard on the 252 program year exchange. Again, limited, no financial impact in that projects are able to use the funding that's vacated in the program years that these projects were in. That the issue is outside of the city's that Blue Line is essentially driving the issues on this project. Again, that the approach is not consistent with how TAB deals with it, so it really is a policy discussion. The one additional element that TAC did discuss in this particular one is that the issue is maybe not quite as definitive as the 252 project, in that the alignment for the Blue Line is not yet determined. However, that being said, it is in an environmental document, just like the 252 project is. I think that concludes my comments, Mr. Chair, unless there are comments for myself.
All right. Any questions or comments with respect to this particular matter? Again, this is another project delayed, no fault of the project sponsors. There's another EIS that needs to be done instead of the environmental assessment. No financial impact. So we got a request to move the two projects totaling $8 million from 2022-23 to 2025-26. And then Chair Solberg, as I recall, the consequences of not doing this would be that it would fall to the locals to fund more of the improvements than they otherwise anticipated having to shoulder in terms of responsibility. Is that a fair statement?
I think, Chair Hovland, yes, I think that's a fair statement. And one thing I did not cover is that these two projects are in the northern portion of the Blue Line extension, which currently appears to be unaffected by this realignment around the BNSF corridor.
All right, thank you. Mayor Stephenson, are you with us? Mayor?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, I just thought your comment at the exec committee was apropos here. I thought it might be beneficial to the TAB members too, about the distinction between or your comments on the 103 project versus the one that we just dealt with.
Sure. I think that the two projects are distinctly different. They're in different parts of the cities. Obviously, the LRT project sort of services through Minneapolis, up through Robbinsdale, along 81, and then up through the community college to the Target campus that's on the west end of Brooklyn Park. The Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park, 252 Road really is on the east side and really serves a much different function, and is obviously a very important corridor for transportation to the northwestern suburbs on both sides of the river.
All right, good, thank you. Any other questions or comments for Chair Solberg? Otherwise, entertain a motion on 103.
So moved, Anderson.
Second, Gotel.
All right, we got a motion and a second on 2021-09 to adopt the recommended action. Is there further discussion?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Member Geisler.
I just have a question for staff here, is that if this is granted and the blue line does not solve or get its alignment and move forward within this timeline, would we consider another extension for this under extenuating, or is this kind of their last shot for extension, knowing that the larger project is still not as defined yet?
Someone from staff care to answer that question? Chair Solberg or Chair Solberg, did you have that conversation at the TAC?
We did not specifically go into what would be another option. I think that was part of the TAC's overall discussion about it's a policy level discussion at this point to determine if they move beyond the 1 year extension. So I think much to Member Geisler's comment, if this moves beyond, maybe that's a discussion or issue that TAB could give TAC guidance on for developing some rules if they wanted to.
All right. Well, we know that you've expressed the consequence of it falling more to the locals to fund the improvements if the blue line goes forward. If the blue line doesn't go forward as a project, or it goes forward with a different alignment that does not require these two particular projects, then what happens? And that might be a good question for staff. Is this this request get withdrawn, it collapses, the money goes back into the regional solicitation? Somebody articulate that?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, this is Steve Peterson here. I would say if something changes, there's a few options. One, the applicant could come in for a scope change, but more than likely, if something happens with Blue Line extension, like we have several per year, they would probably give the money back to the region. Then we'd go through our reallocation policy.
All right. Member Geisler, is that helpful?
Yep, I just wanted to clarify the consequences of that. Thank you.
Good. Any other comments or questions? All right, roll call please, Ms. Ernst, with respect to 2021-09.
Anderson.
Aye.
Bailey.
Aye.
Barber. Barber?
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. Barnes.
Aye.
Boyles.
Aye.
Crimmins.
Aye.
Dugan.
Aye.
Foster.
Aye.
Fox.
Aye.
Geisler.
Aye.
Giuliani Stevens.
Aye.
Gotel.
Aye.
Hanson.
Aye.
Holberg.
Yes.
Hollinshead. Jepson.
Aye.
Johnson Wayne.
Aye.
Keeley.
Aye.
Lindeke.
Aye.
Look.
Aye.
Buin.
Aye.
Metis Castillo.
Aye.
Johnson Glenn.
Aye.
Petrick.
Aye.
Sanger.
Aye.
Stephenson.
Aye.
Tolbert.
Yes.
Ulrich.
Aye.
Williams. Wind Shuttle. Man.
Collins said aye.
Thank you. Wind Shuttle and Workman
Wind Shuttle, yes.
and Workman. Okay.
All right, thank you. The motion passes. 2021-09 is approved. We've got a couple of informational items, and thank you for this streamlined work by the tab today. The first informational item, we got Joe Barbeau who's going to give us an update on the Transportation Improvement Program. Federal government requires that it be updated every 4 years, but the Met Council does it annually, and Mr. Barbeau is going to talk a little bit for that. Mayor Williams, that might be you. There you go. All right. Joe, are you there? Member Barbeau or Mr. Barbeau?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thanks. So the little timeline that was part of your packet shows a pretty slight deviation from what you're used to seeing over the last, more years than I've been around. What happened is last year, you might remember, we had 210 comments in the public comment period for the TIP, which is a record by at least 190 comments. So a lot of people took hold of that as we were running it concurrent with the TPP, as I believe what the difference was. Anyhow, it gave us a very brief period of time to compile and consider those comments, as we usually have about a 1 week turnaround. Typically we'll get 5 to 10 comments, and that's okay. But we decided that we didn't want to leave ourselves open to that again. So the timeline that in front of you shows that rather than the tab releasing the TIP for public comment at its June meeting as it traditionally has, it would do so at the May meeting. The May meeting is the day before funding and programming, which is the day that we usually start that process. So essentially tab would release the public comment in May. And then, the TIP for public comment in May, and then the TAC and funding and programming committees would have the opportunity to review it as they always do. And then you would still finalize the TIP in August, but our TIP public comment period would stagger from late May to early July, as opposed to late June to early August, enabling a lot more time for consideration of the public comments prior to TAB approving in August. So this is an informational item. There's no, we didn't feel the need to ask permission per se.
No, but I think it's a good observation on your part, Mr. Barbeau, as to giving the tab more time to absorb those public comments and get them in early on, so that we can think them through a little bit more thoroughly. And I think that was one of the issues we faced last time. Thanks for making that schedule adjustment. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Barbeau with respect to the modification of the schedule on the Transportation Improvement Program work he's going to be doing this year? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we're going to move on to our last item of the day of substance. There may be some items that tab members have as a follow-on, but in the last solicitation, we talked about race and equity. And as I mentioned in my early comments, I've been on 2 calls with Secretary Buttigieg, and it's reflective, I think, of some of the work that he did in South Bend as mayor with respect to equity. The notion that the transportation improvements ought to be able to touch every household. And it's been entirely consistent, I think, with what we've been thinking here locally in our region about improvements in transportation infrastructure ought to be able to benefit everybody. Those opportunities ought to arrive at every door and every home, so that people can get to work and be as productive as they can be. And in our area where we're expected to have so much growth, we're going to need all hands on deck to meet the kind of expectations that we have from an economic productivity standpoint. So part of that conversation that we had last time involved, getting ourselves grounded in this whole equity concept. And I'm going to have Amy Venowitz introduce Roderick Southall from the Met Council. But Roderick's going to help us with some of these things that we need to keep in mind, things that we talk about, and being able to talk about things using common terms and so that we can all understand clearly where we're heading. And as Roderick will tell you, the goal is to give grace to everyone in talking about a topic that isn't so easy to address, because sometimes you feel like you might stumble inadvertently into a use of language that isn't quite right. And so, as Roderick said, I think, or Amy, this is kind of a booster shot with regard to conversation we need to have and reground ourselves around the concepts of equity and racial equity and the distinctions between those two things. So I'm going to turn now to Amy first, and then on to Roderick, who's going to make a presentation to us and get us heading in a common direction with common language. So Amy Benowitz, please.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you did actually a really great job introducing this topic. I think the one thing I'll add is that this is just the start of our conversation. We're intending to, over the next 3 to 4 months, bring in a series of presenters on the topics of transportation and equity. But we're starting out today, as the chair said, with just grounding everyone in the same concepts and definitions maybe. And this is your opportunity as we start this conversation to ask questions about equity, particularly institutional inequities. And Roderick is going to start out by setting some ground rules, because we do want this to be an open-ended conversation and to not have people think they're going to get criticized for not understanding these concepts. So Roderick Southall is with the Council's Human Resources Department. He's with our Learning and Organizational Development, and he is in the process of becoming a trainer in the concepts of equity for the Council, and the Council internally is going to be moving into a process of training all employees in equity concepts. So this is our first step, and with that, I will turn it over to Roderick to give you additional background about himself.
Thank you, Ms. Benowitz. And Mr. Southall, welcome.
Thank you for having me today. It's been fascinating and inspiring to hear the work that you guys are doing. And thank you for giving me this time today. As Amy said, I'm with the Council. I've been with the Council a long time. I've been with the Council about 20 years, actually. And I am currently in the Learning and Organizational Division of Human Resources. Before that, I was in the Equal Opportunity Department and did work on equity, small business, etc. It's an exciting time, and it actually has been, I think, at the Council since 2015 or 2013, when equity began to emerge as a central focus of the Council's perspective as they were doing work in the region. So the conversation today is really, we talked about it being a booster shot, because I think in this day and age, everyone has had conversations and heard conversations about racial equity and equity. And so it's not a new topic. What sometimes is new is having really productive conversations around it. And so as we go through the presentation today, I'm hoping that one of the things that emerges is that you do have some shared language and feel like you have a clear way to go forward with regard to talking about racial equity. I'm going to start the PowerPoint, and hopefully I can get this to, there's one video, so I've got to do something a little bit special here.
Roderick, just to let you know, Greg is sharing the PowerPoint, so you don't have to.
Oh, that is awesome.
So just let him know when you want him to move forward on the slides.
Oh, perfect. Hey, Greg. All right, so let's get going. Let's get going. We've got about 40 minutes. So, all right, great. Ground rules, they're basic. Just turn off your email, instant messaging tools, clear other distractions from your meeting area, if you will. And we want you today to just listen openly, disagree respectfully. Get out of your comfort zones. Like today, habits are hard to break. I was like, I'm doing a presentation. So I brought my Altoids and I was like, you don't need your Altoids, but that's a habit I have. So being mindful that you're gonna move out of your comfort zone. We're gonna try some new thoughts and behaviors. I would say be curious and ask questions about things that you don't quite understand. My job is to say them clearly and to explain them, give some context. If there's something that I explained that you don't quite get, no shame in saying, hey, I have a question about that. Any other ground rules you think we need to add today? All right, let's move to the next slide. Objectives. We want to create an effective community environment for conversations about racial equity and transportation. Hopefully we can support the increased agreement about the centering of racial equity in the funding and policy decisions that you make. And hopefully, again, like I said earlier, we can support a shared development of a consistent approach to racial equity. I always think of, I sometimes in my mind, and when I'm talking to myself about how things happen, I think about the work of equity being kind of like a recipe, right? Recipes are written, do this first, do this second for a reason, right? Because there's science behind how those things are done and how they interact, how those ingredients interact together. I would suggest that doing racial equity work is the same way, right? There is a science to how and when you do the various parts of an approach to racial equity. All right, so those are the objectives, and let's move forward. We got 3 sections. The first one is history and race. Then we'll talk about some disparities and where we are today. And then the last section is just keys to effective racial equity outcomes. I want to start here because in this conversation about equity, it really is a long conversation that we've been having as a country for a long time. So I thought it made sense to start and look at some of the public policies and social policies that the country's had, how those have impacted sort of race and how people live. Talk specifically a little bit about race and transportation because they've been in tension for a while. And then talk about the evolving understanding of the role in race and racism. And I say evolving because, this, again, I think is an area where all of us, right, we're all in together and we're all learning from each other, we're learning from our successes, and we're learning from our mistakes. And so it really is an evolving understanding of race and racism. All right, next slide. One of the things you'll notice is that as we're here today together, is that I really like statements, right? And so I use them a lot. And one statement I think is really powerful as we think about sort of the charge, right, that we're honored with, whether you're serving on TAB or any other of the councils, of the bodies that work with the council, is that it really is a trust about the allocation of resources, and thus it hinges on who you value, what you value, and how you value those things. I think it's probably really accurate. I think the statement is that we allocate value to people, and then we allocate the resources to support them, right? If I don't think about you, then I don't think about making sure you have the resources you need, okay? So empathy, if you will, compassion, equal public policy in a really large philosophical way, but I think it translates in very real ways. Next slide, please. Some examples, and you guys have, like me, have probably heard of these in your history books or your social studies books in school. There's a long list of sort of public and social policies that have brought the country to the place that it is today. This is, a simple list of not nearly, 1/100th of them, right? There were many social and public policies. I listed these because I thought they were apropos to the conversation today. And then I highlighted 2, which I think really illuminate the touch the decisions that you guys make as a body, as a board. So the first one is redlining, and the second is highway planning. So we'll start, I think, with redlining. Next slide, please. All right. You guys may or may not have seen these maps before, but these are redlining maps of the Twin Cities, right? One is St. Paul, one is Minneapolis. And redlining is a term that was associated with neighborhoods and land and the willingness of banks to make loans, right? It was if you were in a red section, that meant, well, you can make a loan here to buy a house, but it's risky, right? In the green areas, it was like, go right for it. And so these are really maps that set early on sort of where it was wise to make investments and where it was not so wise, particularly around sort of housing. And how this happens is you have an individual who says, you know, I don't want to live, you know, I want all the, if you will, the colored people to live or the Black people to live away from me. Then there becomes, as Black people come in, they're all channeled to that area by real estate folks or by wanting to be with other Black people. And then you have banks saying, well, you know, I'm glad you want to live here, but I'm not so sure I can make a loan to you because this is a risky neighborhood to loan in. I'll give you a concrete example. One of the things that I think is credited with sort of really bolstering the middle class, right? We're growing the middle class in the country was the GI Bill. So this is how this works. So you have the GI Bill did a lot for a lot of folks. It did, you know, educational grants and money for folks, for our veterans, and it also did home loans, right? So what happened with the GI Bill was, and how it interacts with redlining is, GI Bill said to everyone, to all lenders, this is a United States-backed loan, right? So you won't risk anything. In these redlined areas where real estate agents and bankers were saying, not such a wise place, even though Black VAs were coming back from the wars and getting approved for a VA loan, you know, being eligible for a VA loan, banks would say, it's kind of a risky area. Seems kind of odd if it's US backed, right? What that meant is, as Blacks were being sort of denied, sort of living outside of the red areas, if you will, and being relegated to needing to pay for homes in the red area, loans were smaller, if given at all. What that meant is that you had clusters of Black people living in the red areas, not able to get loans to live anyplace else, not able to add value, right? Not able to build wealth. There's an estimation that somewhere about, in today's dollar, I think $1.2 trillion of denied loans to Black GI veterans who were eligible for them. And only didn't get them because they were able to live in redlined areas. The other facet of that, I would say, is also you've heard of racial covenants that said, you know, you can't sell your home to a Black person or a Jewish person, et cetera. That was another thing that I think bolstered the redlining problem. So you have that locally here in the Twin Cities. I think it's well documented. I think there was an exhibition that traveled around to talk about it. And then the next slide, if you will, Greg, talks about how this sort of local thing was happening all over the country, right? So it just wasn't happening in Minneapolis and St. Paul. This was something that was affecting people of color across the country. So nationally, they were relegated to places that were not seen as good places to be, and thus not able to build the kind of wealth that other communities could. The next slide, if you will, Greg, is another local example. And that is an example of what people talk about as the Rondo community and what happened when 94 went through Rondo. So on the slide, you see, you know, some folks at a market, seems like they're, you know, great market. They're kind of doing their thing in their neighborhood. The lower image is of how it looked as they were building 94 through Rondo. When I first came to Minneapolis, I was like, that was in 91. I moved to North Minneapolis, and I was like, I don't know why people are so, what is such a big deal about Rondo? Because at that time, you know, there were lots of black people living in North Minneapolis and South Minneapolis. It wasn't until I looked at a map from the 1930s where it was a map of how sort of where the black people were living in Minnesota that I saw that the largest group of black people were living where Rondo was. Then I was like, oh, that's why it's such a big deal, because it was a central community for this Twin Cities area. Next slide, please. So this is a great map that was done actually in 1935 by a sociologist. And he was looking at sort of where people lived. And so if you look closely at the map, you can see where Rondo comes in and heads from St. Paul to Minneapolis, or Minneapolis to St. Paul. And in that brown block, if you look carefully, you can see that it says Negroes, right? That's where the Negroes live. You can also see areas where it says slums in brown as well. And so when you think about what Rondo did, what Rondo had done to it by the authorization to build 94, they cut that community right in half. And they knew that it was an existing community. It wasn't like it was unknown, as this map shows. And what that did, of course, you know, Rondo was a vibrant neighborhood. What that did was lessen the value of the real estate there, kill off sort of a central business district where black people were used as a very middle class business district. And so today, I think when people hear Rondo, they're like, oh, we're tired of hearing about Rondo, or Rondo happened as a, you know, it's just one of those things that happened. I think you should look at the next slide and realize that, like redlining, it was something that was happening across the country, right? All these communities and many more have a Rondo story. And it really is a story of being, not really being considered by folks who were given the honor of supporting the infrastructure development of the Twin Cities. Next slide, please. I said earlier that, you know, race and transportation have been intertwined for a long time in this country. You know, we know that through sort of segregated transportation, people think of that as sort of like the Montgomery bus boycott, right? Federally funded highways that plow through, or in some cases isolated, you know, minority neighborhoods. Rondo is an example of that. Inadequate or substandard walking, biking, or riding infrastructure for people who use these different modes, right? Which is about increasing the danger to folks in terms of higher incidence of collisions, right? Getting hit, getting hurt. Another impact, of course, of transportation is putting it in places where, not putting it, that's the wrong way to say it, having transportation facilities that by their very presence impact the air quality and can lead to negative health effects for residents. And so often in this country, that really has been, you know, alongside or through communities that didn't have a lot of power, right? Sometimes Black communities, Jewish communities, Latino communities, sometimes just poor communities of mixed ethnicities. Next slide, please. I was delighted to listen on the conversation today because it's clear that you guys understand sort of how central transportation is to people's lives, right? From their home to their work to where they play and park, groceries, health. And in knowing the role you play, I believe that you also understand the centrality, if you will, that equity plays in the work that you do. Next slide, please. So I said that we were talking about the evolving understanding of role of race and racism. This graphic is a graphic I like because it's a set of gears, and it really talks about that individual racism can lead to institutional racism, which can lead to structural racism. Think about the example of the bankers and the redlining, right? So redlining generated from people who did not want to live next to people who were not like them, right? So they were, either excluded by violence, excluded by covenant, excluded by real estate agents who said, nope, you should look over here. Or excluded by bankers who would refuse to lend them money to live in those neighborhoods. So you have these acts, I will say bankers, who are refusing to lend money for folks to live in these neighborhoods. Then on an institutional level, you have a banker doing that. Then all of a sudden the bank is doing that. The bank is, we don't have a policy that's too high of risk. We can't give money to folks in red-lined areas. We can't make loans to them, right? We inhibit their ability to build wealth. And then it begins to be structural, like we saw in the maps, whether it's when you saw the places where redlining was happening. What that also meant is that not only banks, not only individual banks, but banking associations, regional and national, were making decisions, all making the same decision, not to loan to folks in Black neighborhoods, in redline neighborhoods, not to loan to folks who wanted to move out of their neighborhoods and build wealth, right, in other areas. So you have this sort of individual actions, community or professional banker, if you will, real estate agent, making it a norm at their institution, whether it be a bank or a real estate firm. Then, as a part of an association, banking associations or real estate associations, making it a norm that happens all the way across the country. So it's individual, turning the gears for institutional racism, if you will, turning the gears for structural racism. So I like this example because I think it really cleanly shows how these things interact. Next slide, please. So often, I think when we have conversations about race, one, I don't think we give each other enough grace because we literally are all trying to figure this out together. But you got individual racism, as we talked about, institutional racism, the policies, practice, procedures that work better for one group than another, intentionally and sometimes unintentionally. And then structural racism, which sort of makes it sort of the norm across the country. So there's a whole system that supported redlining. There's a whole system that supported building highways through communities that were disenfranchised, right? Those weren't just local actors. Next slide, please. So one of the other things when we talk about sort of an evolving conversation about race and racism is these terms that pop up, right? Not only structural, individual, and institutional racism, but terms like diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I would just say with these terms is that I think in trying to do our best to be fair and just to all folks, organizations and groups will grab on to one of these, two of these, or all three, right? They'll say, let's do diversity by inviting more people in, right? And having more people in will make, will help us arrive to do the right thing. Will help us do the right thing by a diverse group of people. Then they say, okay, well, now they're in. Now we have to face how we include them, right? How we include their voices. They're bringing these experiences that maybe I don't know or I don't agree with, but they're bringing these experiences in there and they're asking to be heard, right? So inclusion becomes the next step on the ladder, right? We've got a diverse set of folks. We want to have these conversations and we realize that we need to have a conversation and we give different perspectives. And so there's inclusion. And then I think the third piece of that is equity. And that is what the council has said is needed for the region, right? That's a pledge for fair treatment, opportunity, and advancement by identifying barriers and eliminating them. So those are kind of the three things that you see that the three ways in which people will talk about moving forward on justice. I'd like to suggest that while they're used, they don't mean the same thing, so they shouldn't be used interchangeably. But I think people do. People maybe say diversity when they mean inclusion, or equity when they mean diversity. So people will use them that way. I don't know if that's helpful. So I would say if you want to think about sort of when you mean diversity, say diversity. When you mean inclusion, say inclusion. When you mean equity, say equity. But also at the same time, give yourselves and others grace for the way they overlap and interplay with each other. And you might use the wrong term sometimes, but just know that they're different. So we talked about racial equity. We've talked about equity. We've talked about diversity. We've talked about inclusion. We've talked a bit about structural racism, institutional racism, individual racism. And so those are terms. I'm sharing with you so you can have them and use them in your conversations or in your thinking. Next slide, please. As the conversation about racism and race has flourished, I think, there are also ideas about sort of how it's shown, how it shows itself. And, as this slide says, it shows we can have institutional racism or bias that is really explicit. We can have institutional racism or bias that is implicit, right? And the same thing with individual implicit and explicit bias or racism. Next slide, please. That can be kind of confusing, so I wanted to give you some examples to think about in terms of bias. The first, this arrow talks about the first one is when there is institutional explicit bias, right? And this has happened in the history of our country. People of color historically prohibited from using the libraries by force of law, right? Institutional implicit bias, right? Because it doesn't need to be explicit to have that effect, have an effect of treating people differently. In this case, it might be a library strict enforcement of the fine collection, right? Which would provide a barrier to people of color and other folks who are overrepresented in low-income populations. Individual explicit, this is the one that I think people are most used to pointing at, right? A library staff tells a patron that they're not being served because they're of a different race. I think that's what we often raise up when we're talking about these things. And then there's implicit, right? The staff doesn't say anything explicitly, but they decide to renew a lost item. They extend the return date, mark as claimed return, or waive charges more often for white patrons and patrons of color, right? That's implicit. Next slide, please. This is a policing example. I won't kind of read through it, but again, I would go to individual explicit, police officer calling someone an ethnic slur while arresting them, right? That's something that we identify and go, oh, that's really bad. What we don't often think about so much is the example of implicit individual, right? The police officer calling for more backup when stopping a person of color than they would a person who is white, right? Next slide, please. So the reason I think those are important, because I think when we go to have conversations about race and racism, sometimes we're talking about, hey, that implicit action was awful, but we don't call it implicit. We say that was racist. What that person did was racist. Everyone goes, whoa, everyone gets shocked and goes, that's really bad. In the same breath, someone might say, why is there 5 police cars around this one car in North Minneapolis when the person was just, had a tail light out? I don't know that too often we get, as a country, as a community, we get up in arms about that kind of thing. All right. So that's just a quick and dirty on some terms that I think you can digest and think about. And think about them in terms of when you're having a conversation with someone about race, sort of, are you and they talking about the same thing? Are you talking about implicit individual and they're talking about it too? Are you talking about implicit institutional and are they talking about it too? Or are they talking about institutionally implicit actions, right? Where there's a policy that hurts one group over the other, and you're talking about individual. Try to come to agreement on that when you guys are talking about 2 different things. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I've enjoyed about working at the Met Council is I think the Met Council has done a good job of sort of facing things, right? And I love this quote that says, not everything that's faced can be changed. It can't, really. But unless we're going to face it, we can't change it. But nothing can be changed until we face it. Next slide, please. This is a short video called Racism is Real. Just want you to check it out and then we'll continue. It's about 2 minutes, I think. I don't know if folks can hear it, Greg.
I cannot hear it on my side.
So while Greg is working on that, are there any questions? Am I being clear? Are you enthralled? Are you confused?
Questions for Roderick? Comments? Too. This is a new area for the tab. Some of the mayors and elected officials have been working in their respective communities on this issue. And so those folks will see some familiar themes here. But it is good that we're taking this on at the tab, I think.
Yeah, I don't think these are common in any, I think, inclusion, equity training. These are things you're going to get. You might not always get them sort of in this community. I think the last time that the tab looked at equity collectively was in 2015, when I think there was a 3-part training to sort of ground the tab in what equity was, and it resulted actually in a focus statement, which we'll look at later. Questions? Any questions? Comments? Is there any?
Mr. Chair, Stan.
Yeah, member Commissioner Karwoski, and then member Foster.
Roderick, This is good. I like the presentation so far. It's very direct and forward. You know, it's just thinking. But I'm kind of interested as the tab. If we leverage this learning, if we take away something from it, that when we put in transportation packages, whether it be roads or even trails, but particularly transit, that we have a better sense of reaching all the people, and that's where I see the equity coming into play, by reaching the true customers that are out there that I don't think we've reached out in as much of a meaningful way. So that's what I'm hoping the takeaway will be, is that we make our transit products even better because we're reaching out to the right people.
I think I think TAB has a pivotal role as a funder of such a number of projects. And I think, like any foundation that funds things, you have an ability to assist the folks who are seeking funding in being curious about how to instill more equity, right, in their projects. And I think, I think you are able to do that. Who's causing the...
Janet, you're off mute.
Okay, I was saying, as a funder, I think you have I would suggest both an obligation and an opportunity to encourage the people that are funded by you to be curious, to do the work of trying to figure out how to do equity better, right? Because you're funding them. So you have a chance to sort of ask them sort of, what did you do? How are you sure it's going to work? How are you measuring it? In a way that, because when people come to you for funding, they kind of want to do what you want to fund, right? They want to fill out that application in a way that will get it funded. And I think that is a wonderful opportunity that you have to push equity in the region. And in addition, you have an opportunity to allow experimentation, because like we're all learning. You know, equity is, while it's talking about for 5 or 6 years or whatever, we're all still learning. So you have an opportunity to fund folks to try new things, and you have the opportunity to lift those things that work up and share them with others. So it becomes a shared science, if you will. It looks like Greg has got the video ready for us. Let's see if we can hear it.
Okay, Roderick, we got probably about 10 minutes. And we're a little over right now, but I want to let people try to finish up.
Okay. All right, thank you, Greg. We can go to the next slide. That was a video that the folks in Metro Transit shared with me, which I thought was nice because it just really lays out some statistics that says, you know, you may not experience it every day, but these are some things that are really real, right? And it links very clearly to the severities we already know. Next slide, Greg. You can go to the next slide, Greg. Yep. And then it leads to the way the council looks at sort of what we could have instead of these disparities. You guys have all seen these slides before. Next slide, Greg. This is a graphic depiction of what the council's equity definition is. You guys have all seen this, I think, before. And the next slide is TAB's focus statement that was constructed in 2015, right? So this is what you guys say that you're going to do to support, thrive, and the equity outcomes. Next slide, please. One of the things that I think is really hard for folks is to think about doing equity through a racial lens, right? We want to do equity. We want everyone to be done. We want to treat everyone the same way, give everyone access. But there are reasons why we suggest lead with race. One is because the equities are deep and pervasive, as we've seen in the stats. Often it's the elephant in the room that we can't talk about. Often learning an institutional or structural approach can be used in other areas, right? So if you do it for folks who are most marginalized, the learning you can build on and do it better. And specificity matters. Here are a couple examples of why we should lead with race. And I should say also, when we do that, we don't mean to exclude these other dimensions of folks, right? They're additive. Next slide. So for example, one of the things that I think is really interesting is so often there's a standoff between whether people with disabilities or people of color need to have the most attention paid to reducing their disparities. But seldom do I see a chart that says, well, I don't know, let's see who in these communities is suffering the most. And in this case, when you look at, for example, a white poverty rate of 12 and an indigenous poverty rate of 44, that provides a sort of a clear signal, right, to who you might want to target first. Next slide, please. The same thing happens with gender, right? We talk about sort of the pay gap, and the pay gap that sort of everybody seems to know is the pay gap between women as a whole, right? 18% less than white men as a whole. But if you go all the way down the list, you're like, well, wait a minute. If my goal is to close that gap, that 18-cent gap, then I'm missing out on Latinas and Blacks, et cetera, all those other folks that are not white women who are in that sort of area. Next slide, please. So I think all of the conversation we've had at this point was really just to suggest that there are some ways to do equity, I think, and to be really effective about it. One, I think, is to prioritize the conversation about race and racial-driven disparities. To move from transactional engagements and approaches to transformational approaches. And lastly, show your math, be accountable and show your math. That's from my schooling. Next slide, please. Equity is not an outcome, I think you should realize, I would suggest. It's a process, so it matters. Like I used the baking example. It matters what ingredients you put in when. Next slide, please. When we talk about racism, I think one of the things that's hard is because so often we're trying to create a comfortable place to talk about it. Defining race differently. I talked about whether you're talking about explicit, individual, implicit, or institutional. So often we're talking about race, but we're not talking about it on the same level of analysis. So we can't kind of come together. We keep talking at each other, right? And we don't want to keep that going. We want really to be talking to people with each other. We want the committee members to be talking with each other about how to solve these problems. Next slide, please. One of the key takeaways, I think, is to take, and I think they'll send you the slide deck, is to think about the approach, right? Whether you're taking a transactional approach I can fix it, it's fixed easily, we'll fix it once, or whether it's approach that transforms you as a committee, right? Because a transactional approach says, oh, we're going to keep doing the same exact thing we've been doing, and maybe we'll tinker around the edges. I think a transformational approach says, let's think about how we've been doing this, right? Because equity, again, I would say, is the process, not only the outcome. And so how are we coming up with solutions? Who are we including in the conversation, right? And how is that changing us? Next slide, please. Couple of examples to sort of make transactional and transformational real for you. This is a example of DBEs, contractors. You can either, in this case, have them apply for contracts. Great, they're eligible to apply, to doing something more, right? Making a deliberate choice to engage more DBEs and engage them in different ways, so to change the environment. The other example is translating documents for limited English speakers. We can do that and kind of put them out in the world, or we can really develop a relationship with immigrant communities and refugee communities and let that be, and let them help us figure out how to win and how to communicate with folks who speak English as a second language. Next slide, please. I always say, do your math, and I mean it. And I think this is a place for experimentation. So when I talked about you being a funder, being able to sort of ask people sort of to experiment, sort of figure out how to do it, that's kind of what I mean by doing your math and being accountable. So, and I think you would say to the folks who you fund to is, you know, did you lead with race? Is what you're doing, how is equity, how is racial equity central in what you're asking us for? What are the results? What do they look like to you, right? What are the indicators, right? Because so often I think we put indicators, people say they tell us what indicators they're going to use, and those indicators don't really match the desired result. What the data and what you tell your partners do, right? So you get the data and then you sort of walk away and say, we've got the data, as opposed to maybe going back to the partners and saying, this is what this data says to us. Does it say the same thing to you? And then lastly, you know, what works, right? Being that place that can convene and can gather those ideas that have worked amongst the folks you fund, right? And letting the other folks you know that you fund know what they are, so they can have a head start on doing it better. Next slide, please. So this is really the last slide, and I know we're tight on time, but I'm hoping that this presentation has given you something to think about. I hope it has helped you think about sort of why we lead with race and why it's important. And I hope it has helped you think about sort of how you might think about your process and centering it in racial equity. All right. I have two questions, but I'll actually take any questions that you have. And I hope you have a good time doing the next steps over the next 3 months as you think about equity and how you can support it in your work.
Thank you, Roderick. Greg, could you pull the slide show down so we can see everyone? And does anyone have any questions or comments? I noticed, Roderick, there's a few in the chat. You want to take a look there for you. And then Amy, while Roderick's looking at that, Amy, are we going to have Roderick available as a resource as we go through the next few months from time to time?
Well, Mr. Chair, this is Amy. I'm hoping, I haven't had that explicit conversation with Roderick yet, but he's aware that we're going to be having this conversation over 3 to 4 months. So I'm hoping and thinking he will be willing to come back next month. So next month, we will be talking about areas of concentrated poverty and kind of how they have been evolving over time. And if we have time, we will get into how we have been measuring and treating equity within the regional solicitation. But we could start next month out by continuing this conversation with Roderick and then move into other topics, but I'm guessing Roderick will be with us along the way for the next few months.
All right, that's nice to know. Thank you. And then I think one of the other things we talked about was potential TAB input from TAB members on suggestions on speakers we might have over the next few months, in addition to Roderick.
Yes, and anyone can send those to me. Particularly, we know a lot of the local government entities are working on equity issues and might have good topics or presentations, particularly if they're transportation related, that you have been diving into. We also are intending to approach the Alliance and/or the Center for Economic Inclusion and Reconnect Rondo. All three of those advocacy groups have been doing in-depth work on equity and more specifically transportation and equity. So we'll have conversations with them too.
All right, good. Well, other folks are probably like me. They've got other meetings here in just a few minutes. But is there, Roderick, were there any questions in there you thought you could answer quickly?
No, not really. Just, I would just say it's been a pleasure talking to you. Looking forward to continue the conversation. And, you know, we literally are in it together and we're going to learn from each other.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. We are really appreciative of you being here and assisting us in this, starting out having a common sort of definition on language, a common language to use.
Sure.
Okay. Now, Debbie Gattell has sent to Elaine the House Bill 1027. So Elaine will circulate that to all the TAB members. And then we don't have time to discuss this today, but that comment I made about the extension of the program year beyond the usual sunset date policy that we have, that might be a conversation we want to hold for next time. And if people have some initial thoughts on it, whether they want to address that or just continue the process like we did today of addressing these issues on a one-off basis with the input from our technical people, that might be a good conversation to have so we know which direction to go and which direction we can tell our technical people and staff we're going to be going. So keep that in mind for next month as well. That's it for me. Did any other TAB members have items they wanted to address with their colleagues? Okay. All right. Well, we will stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
It was a content-rich meeting. Thanks for your good participation.
It certainly